Great. There is no consent agenda for today. For the minutes from July 7th, are there any corrections? If not, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of June 7th?
I'll move.
Thank you, Jonathan. And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye, or any opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining because I was not present for the meeting.
Okay,
Same
great.
with me. I'm
I abstain as well.
Okay, did you get all those, Brian? I can't see everyone.
I got Sam, I got Aaron, and there was the second person. Didn't
Adele.
catch. Adele Hayden. Got it, thank you.
Okay,
Brian, can I interject for a minute? So we do have a change to the agenda, which is the addition of a tip amendment that was emailed out to folks yesterday. I believe VTrans might want to make some change to this. So if we could put that on the deliberative agenda, that would be good.
okay. Is that a quick one, Christine?
It should be, yes.
Okay. If no one has any objections, let's start with that and then continue with the rest of the agenda. Great. So,
You want me to
Christine-
go ahead right now?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, so so there was an email that went out to you yesterday. Apologies for it coming so late, but these are two rail crossing projects, King Street and Maple Street in Burlington. The tip needs to be amended for two things: to adjust to the bid price, and the second is we had funds in federal fiscal year 21, which were not obligated. So as you know, at the end of September 30th, 2021, if those funds aren't obligated, the project can't use them anymore. So we need to bring some funds forward. Now, Matt, I will invite you now. If there's another change to this, please go ahead.
Is there someone from VTrans? who-
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. I've been on Teams this all morning and it's in a different place. No, that looks fine as presented. And as Christine said, it's a combination of the low bids coming a little higher and not being able to obligate all of the funds last year.
okay. Did you need another change to that or no?
Uh,
Did I misunderstand your email this morning?
No, that's for a totally different project.
That's for a totally different project. Is that something that you also wanted to do today?
If possible, I mean, I don't have anything to present to the TAC, but we also have a culvert project that's on the same line that the low bid came in way over our estimate, and that was just brought to my attention last week, even though the low bid came in a while back. And I'm kind of.
So I think what we could do with that, if the TAC is comfortable, is because the board will have to approve this, we could flesh out the details and get it to the board and email it to you before the board meeting for this other culvert, if that's something that we want to do. But let's do these two intersections for these rail crossings first. So do we have any?
Are there any questions on that?
Thank you, Barbara.
I'm not seeing any. Hopefully I'm seeing everyone.
Sorry, this is Deirdre. Maybe just a quick explanation of what the work entails and what the improvement will look like.
I'm going to start and you can, I mean, I think it will look the way that it looks now. It's really just with Amtrak coming in to improve the safety of the intersection, since those are high pedestrian volume, and so it's the signals and really the pedestrian crossings. Do I have that right, Matthew?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not anything you're gonna see. It's just the function of the rail, safety equipment and such.
Yeah, it was to bring us into compliance so that we could get Amtrak service to Burlington.
You satisfied, Deidre? Okay. Any other questions regarding the project? Do we have a motion to approve the tip amendments?
I'll make a motion to approve. Bruce Orr.
Thanks, Bruce. Second?
Second,
Great, thank you. All those in favor, say aye or wave your hand.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Abstentions? Okay, that sounds like that passes.
And then the second item, the culvert, if are folks okay with us bringing this forward to the board next month and just informing you of the change before the board meeting and giving you an opportunity to forward comments to the board if you choose? I guess I would say, does that, if anybody's opposed to that, then please speak up.
Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so let's proceed that way. Christine. So the next item on the agenda is the V-Trans equity framework, and that's a presentation and discussion. Who is leading that?
Excuse me, I think we missed approving the minutes. Or
Oh,
did I
I'm
miss that?
sorry. Yes, we did. All those in favor of approving the minutes from June 7th, please say aye. Opposed? Oh, we did do that. We have the abstentions already. I'm sorry.
On the
Do we not-
minutes, we did that?
Do we not have the abstentions already?
Yes, I have 3 abstentions.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Bruce, I guess we already did that. So now we are at the equity framework. Did you have any?
Okay, well, I'm sorry, there's one change to those minutes. Tom DePietro's down there as being at the meeting twice. And I know he's a new director, so maybe he wants to, make it look like he's been around more or something, but anyway, just one comment on those.
Okay. So I think that we can still proceed with that typo. Okay,
Great, thanks, Bruce.
great. Brian, who is leading the equity framework discussion this morning?
We've got Dave Pelletier from V-Trans, as well as Jonathan Slason from RSG. Thank you both for being here. I'll let y'all introduce the project, but I do want to note before we jump in, what we missed at the beginning was we have some changes in TAC membership with the city of Burlington. So I want to recognize that Norm Baldwin is the new TAC representative, and Laura Wheelock is the alternate. Laura is joining us today for the first hour for this presentation. So I just want to recognize them and say hi. And then I'll pass it over to Dave and Jonathan.
Thank you, Brian.
Hi, thanks very much for having us this morning. Dave Pelletier from Vermont Agency of Transportation. We are here this morning to have a discussion with you all about the Transportation Equity Framework report that we are developing right now. And John Slason from RSG is going to lead the presentation. And we'll cover the genesis of the project, where we're headed with it, and lead some discussion with a set of questions that we hope we can get some feedback from you all on. So I won't take up any more airtime. I'll pass it right over to John so we can get into the presentation and have a discussion with you all. Thanks for having us this morning.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All right, you all should be seeing the presentation. Is that right? Great.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, welcome. Thanks everybody this morning. As Dave said, my name is Jonathan Slason. I go by he, him pronouns. And RSG's had the pleasure of leading this effort with a pretty large consulting team to support V-Trans and all the RPCs carry out this equity framework. We're meeting today as part of the engagement task, which will kind of discuss where we sit within the project overall. But we're going to spend about 15, probably 20 minutes. I'll go a little bit fast to introduce some of the context of where this came from, what we're exploring and finding at this point in time. And then we wanted to spend the majority of the time asking some questions. And those questions are primarily geared so that the project itself can accurately represent how the RPCs are viewing these topics and how you're currently engaging in the equity process of project development. And then we will also want to maybe brainstorm as to how best the framework can deliver value to you as you proceed in doing your work. So we'll dive right in. And yeah, I'll go by John today. I see that Jonathan Weber's on the call, so it'll make it easier for everybody. And also, if there's any urgent questions, please feel free. I'll just bring us back to the presentation if we get too far off track. So hybrid meeting practices, we're not all there in person. It's hard to read body language. I do encourage as much as possible, even though I can't see everybody, but to put the videos on, we can try to understand body language and understand if people are feeling the urgency to step in and say something or feeling uncomfortable, but also be mindful of the mute button. Speak from the I position. We realize that we represent more than just ourselves on these meetings. However, we don't want to represent, particularly for some of these topics. So we want to say, I feel this, I believe, I know, I think. We want to encourage you to be a participant, but also realize that we need to hear from as many people as possible. So step up, but also step back. Lastly, don't let the fear of saying something wrong or be discomforting, uncomfortable, prevent you from saying something. We're all learning. We need to be interested in these topics and respectful. So some of the context, the start of the project was that it started from the last year's transportation bill, so not the most recent session, that the transportation bill put in a section to say that this transportation equity framework would be developed in partnership with the 11 RPCs around the state. And so we're here today as part of that partnership arrangement, and we'll discuss a little bit later how other aspects of that partnership looks in terms of developing this. But the idea is that the framework itself will help inform how equity is embedded into the transportation project process. So that would be identifying needs, investments, prioritizing those investments, as well as delivering those investments in an equitable way, and to achieve equity in our society, or to at least address current inequities. This presentation, Brian has the PDF as of today. He'll share this out after the TAC meeting so that you're able to read all of the content that we may go a little bit faster through some of these slides. So first off, we know that age, income, ability, language, race, and ethnicity are predictors of health, safety, and social well-being, as well as resiliency in the face of climate change and economic shocks. We also understand that social equity recognizes that we all deserve to have a fair and just access to resources and opportunities to meet our needs, even though we started life in different circumstances. These two statements ground us in facts that are brought about by empirical observation and evidence, and we're looking to address these challenges. And to achieve an equitable outcome is that these predictors are not predictors of your outcomes over time. And so that we want to achieve a social equity outcome that we can all meet our daily needs, even though we did start out in these different locations or circumstances. So transportation equity, we're changing the nuance there from social equity to a particular transportation focus now. The project is midway through its course, and we've done some work canvassing national and local resources as to how we define equity and how do we define it in the transportation space. At this point in time, this is our working definition, if you will, of what transportation equity looks like. but we realize it may evolve and change as a result of these meetings and as a result of subsequent other engagement efforts. But at this point in time, just want to draw our attention is that transportation equity must reduce inequities across our transportation system and the communities that they affect. We realize that transportation equity enables communities as well as individuals to access safe, affordable, inclusive, and multimodal means to satisfy basic needs. Transportation equity is also focused on achieving resilient and sustainable access to these opportunities, while also ensuring that we're reducing transportation-related disparities and adverse community impacts. We realize that transportation equity is an end goal, but like most goals, it's a process to get there. And we realize that it will be realized when these outcomes are achieved and these communities are not overburdened. So that sets us up with where we aim to go and what we aim to achieve by embedding transportation equity into our planning process. So now in terms of some of the more tactical approaches to the project itself, where the RPCs are involved, we have a working group. So you're Charlie Baker. I think I see Charlie. I think I saw him dial into the call. He's a member of the working group that we have as part of the project, along with Mike Winslow from Addison County. So I forget how many members of the working group we have, maybe 12 or so. So the RPCs have 2 members along with other state agency representation. The working group is informing the process. It's providing feedback and comments. It's also providing us a grounding as to ensure that when the actions are developed and the framework is developed, we can make it as meaningful and actionable as possible. The other key areas for our RPC involvement is the upstream tasks after we do the stakeholder and involvement aspect that we're in now today. We're going to be coming back and discussing the recommendations and implementation plan, but also the draft and final reports themselves. So we'll be circulating those reports around. We'll be using the working group to be the interface. We'll decide if it is the most beneficial to the plan, whether we try to have another meeting like this, but ideally it will be we'll have Dave, we'll have other representations of the projects to provide these documents to you, and that we'll receive comments written. So what is a framework? We all deal with these different terms day to day, but the idea is that the framework will help us answer questions, such as who's out there in our communities that may not be meeting their needs due to these inequities. How do we identify the projects or programs that we need to make our investments? How can we involve all Vermonters in the decision-making process, and how can their voices and concerns be heard? And how can we fairly and equitably deliver our services? We realize that we have legal requirements today, Title VI and the like, that gives us some guidance. However, those have a pretty narrow viewpoint in terms of who they're engaging and how. And we now need to be encouraged to be more expansive in the definition of who is our community and how do we deliver our services so that we can achieve transportation equity goals. A messy flow chart here just kind of shows how we're organized in the project. We have the agency and the RPCs at the top. You'll be the partners to implement these actions, but also approve them. Michelle Boomhauer, the project lead, is the one responsible for delivering this project, with Dave Pelletier as the project manager leading the day-to-day efforts. And so he's directly interfacing with the consultant team and all the other project partners that are both on the right and left of this slide. I mentioned the working group. It has involvement from other state agencies, ANR, as well as the DMV, which is part of the AOT, but also AOT itself and the RPCs. Then on the the left-hand side of the screen, we have the other public involvement efforts, which I'll go into in a subsequent slide. But one of the key areas of involvement are direct RPCs, namely the tax, but also other invited guests, which I believe we have today. So the idea is that we're going to provide an interface today to collect information, but also share information 2 ways once I cover the background here. And then the tasks 1 through 6, which I'll give a brief overview in just a minute. Now, Vermont's not doing this in isolation. While the legislation was timely, it really corresponded with the executive order of January 2021, which came from President Biden, which grounded us in some of the efforts on equity. This is a more expansive list than what has typically been considered in environmental justice work and Title VI work. It provides us an insight into how the federal government is trying to broaden the awareness of different communities who have been overburdened, underserved, and marginalized and affected by our transportation investments in the past. This provides us a starting point as to what communities we might better understand and reflect who exists in the Vermont context. But we will also be developing our own Vermont-centric list. So this gives us just a sense that the federal government is taking these steps to broaden the awareness of these different communities. The executive order on the far left is just one of the recent federal actions. The other more significant ones, and probably the most significant one, is the IIJA or the BIL, however you like to refer to it as. And that infrastructure law provided substantial new requirements in terms of how the public is engaged, particularly with a focus on equitable engagement. Its new requirements have been identified there as to how we strengthen the public process that has been carried out for years. And there needs to be a more, I think, wider and also a better documented public engagement process in which is set out by the BIL. And I know VTrans is considering what that looks like in terms of our expectations, professionally, what the RPC might be expected to deliver, but also any of the partners that do public engagement. The other pieces that are relevant here is the DOT Equity Action Plan that was released in January 2022. That had 4 pillars to it, but particularly the ones that I always draw out as most important here is an emphasis on wealth creation for communities that have been previously marginalized, but also an effort to provide direct community support. And we've heard from other RPCs, particularly around the state, more rural areas, and communities that are just smaller may not have the technical resources to apply for some of the federal grants and provide to do some of the day-to-day business that we need to do to attract federal funds and to carry out the project delivery process. And so there was a particular effort there in the Equity Action Plan that said they want to provide, they being the federal government, provide more direct support for allowing these communities to gain access to these funds and resources. Lastly, the US DOT strategic plan that was released in the spring of this year also provided a lot of common support to those previous documents, but particularly it was poignant in terms of how equity is now required to be integrated throughout the planning and development process. And so we're going to focus on how that could be carried out as we discuss some of the process that we've sketched out so far in the framework. So bringing us back a little bit just in terms of the project tasks, we're in the middle of this project. We're in the task 3, direct engagement efforts with our stakeholders and the RPCs. We're carrying out some efforts at this point to look at national best practices and the gaps between the state of the practice in Vermont. We're also working on some data and tools. We're in partnership with VTrans. We're looking at A&R partnerships, but also the consultant team themselves. We're looking at how to embed and improve the use of GIS and other census data tools so that we can create resources here in Vermont, and that these resources would be widely available to RPCs, to communities, to towns, not only the Agency of Transportation. We've previously completed the existing policies and concept framework, and that's what's led to some of the material that I've already presented. We're in the middle of the project, as you can see by the vertical red line or dotted line. And where we're at is in this big gray box of the Gantt chart where we're doing the direct engagement with community members, but also specific stakeholders, and we're having dialogues one-on-one with them. but we're also having these TAC meetings throughout the state. We're going to be carrying out these meetings throughout August, September, and into October. So we've got a few more meetings to have after today's. I've mentioned this task 3 stakeholder and public involvement process for a couple minutes here, but a little bit more detail as to what that looks like. We have an effort underway that's looking to bring new voices to the table and identify how those voices can inform how planning can be carried out in the future. We're trying to embed equity as that key component and understand how equity is considered in the planning process. The effort under this contract, I'm really excited about because we're exploring new methods. We're finding new ways to reach communities that otherwise haven't been done in the past. And we're learning from that. We realize that some of these efforts have posed challenges thus far. Some of them have had greater and lesser successes than we would have liked, but all in the spirit of learning as to how to engage and go to people where they are today. The RPC, you all have been innovative in this space in terms of direct stipend and direct compensation, which we're using now at a statewide level through this process. And so we're paying people for some of their expertise, some of their time, and we're also providing stipends and other recognize that there's been an effort to get somewhere if they are coming and participating at an event. So we're trying to lay the groundwork for what these efforts look like going forward. And at the end of this, we hope to have a well-documented exploration to say, these are the communities we've focused on. This is what we've heard, but also these are relationships we've built, and these relationships should outlive this any one effort, and that we're hoping to develop a more perpetual conversation of engagement. And then lastly, there's going to be a learning, and it's going to inform RPCs and any other members of the planning and development process as to how best should public engagement be carried out. There's 4 communities that we're using to ground this research in, one of which is in our area. So the Winooski, Burlington, BIPOC with an emphasis on young adult communities. Young adults have been one that have been harder to engage with in the past. And so it's been a particular emphasis as to how might we find and bring these voices to the table. I mentioned that we're using a variety of engagement efforts and that this engagement is being carried out by the Rights and Democracy Institute, or RDI. And they have been active in the communities. Right now we're in the kind of the core summer pieces, where then it'll be wrapping up in September. And then in October, November, we'll be reviewing, going back to the communities and synthesizing and distilling and saying, this is what we've heard. Do you agree? Is this correct? And then we'll be getting a final report out of that will include into the overall framework. Dave, do you want to say anything more about this? And
no, let's just keep on going, John, and get to discussion points. Thank you.
Great. All right, so here we are on the engagement aspects of today. The idea is that we're going to create some more awareness about how this is carrying out and what information can we learn from each other today. I know just from my past work with the RPC, you all have a lot of these things underway in various facets. So one of this piece will be focused not only on the RPC itself, but also a lot of the community members that are here today and the cities and towns that are represented. We want to collectively listen for some of the questions that we have, your answers, and to then strategize as to how we can embed those recommendations and any learnings that you've had into this process. So we have this preliminary wireframe, if you will, which sets out these pillars and how equity is embedded in the planning process. We're going to go through a handful of these, and I believe we've spent about 15, maybe 18 minutes so far. So we should have a good 40 minutes to dive into this conversation. And Brian, I'm going to look to you. I know our chair and Barbara is the chair, so keep me on task in terms of time management. But I'm looking at about a 40-minute window for a conversation. Is that adequate for everybody?
I believe so.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. All right, so our first pillar here is distributive equity. And this is asking, how do we first understand who is a member of our community? Who lives in our cities, who lives in our towns, who lives in Chittenden County? We realized that in the past, if we've relied on solely census products, we may not understand the full diversity of our population. So the first question here is really focused on what efforts have we made at the regional level, or what efforts have we made at the local level to maybe go beyond census data and to find who lives in our communities. And maybe that's partnerships with advocacy and nonprofits. Maybe it is just the census data, because that is the most publicly and stable data source. So I'm going to open it up to the table. Anybody can jump in, whether it's at the regional level or at town level, and we'll spend a couple minutes here. Yeah, Adele, I think, see your hand.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm in my mask. So the Community Heart and Soul has a really great engagement process. And one of the things they ask is who works, plays, and lives in the community. They expand it that way. And one of the things they found is beyond the sort of traditional data, they have a really intriguing way of finding groups and leaders, because I think what's key in marginalized communities, especially if people are afraid to voice publicly because they're not here legally, you need to find a trusted community leader who can be that extra connection point. And then they've also found that in between censuses, like populations do come in that that just wouldn't be, sorry, I'm getting over COVID, my brain is not working. But anyway, that I'm happy to send you a link to that if that would be helpful. But it's a way of looking at the different community leaders. Like, is there a knitting circle? Is there a horseback riding group? You kind of look at these things that are untraditional. Besides, like anything that's traditional, you need to go beyond. It's got to be the things you never heard of, as a way of getting to that nth degree, because the people you're trying to reach are most likely, well, at least in bigger places, are under the wire intentionally. And so I think you have a trust issue that's critical when you're doing specifically equity work. And I hope that made sense.
Yeah, great. And Adele, I'll have my contact information on the last slide or in the PDF that Brian will send along. And then, did I just hear you right? It was Heart and Soul. Is that right?
It's Community Heart and Soul is the name of the program. And they're actually in Shelburne. They originally were part of the Orton Foundation, the Vermont Country Store, but they've become a separate entity. But they've really built, they've been doing this, oh gosh, between 10 and 20 years, but they have an incredibly robust, unusual way of doing community engagement that really busts out anything that's traditional.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if anybody heard the research. 7 seconds is what you need when you want to wait for somebody to jump in. All right. Well,
Sorry,
You
8
go.
seconds. Including finding the mute button, 8 seconds. Just a question, not quite sure if this is the right time to ask it, but I'm curious about anticipating future growth and changes within communities and in addition to the challenges of knowing precisely an accurate picture of today, how do you fast forward?
Yeah. Well, I don't know the answer to that. Technically, in the modeling and the forecasting world, we don't forecast a lot of the communities. It's impossible, if not even unethical. So there's the forecasting piece is a very challenging one to understand the evolution and how communities change and evolve over time. Definitions change over time. So even how communities define themselves. So the future piece, Deidre, I think is a fascinating comment, and that we'll make note of. Charlie.
Yeah, John, thank you for coming this morning. So I guess I'll start some of the work that we do as staff. Just to, I think you're aware of some of it, but yeah, and we definitely rely on census information as one significant component of understanding who's in our community. And just for the group, if you didn't take a look at our ECOS report that came out in the last week or two, only, I think it was 30, we had about 12,000 people growth in population over the last decade, you know, from 2010 to 2020. Only 32 of them were white. So just to give you some sense, yeah, out of 12,000 people, only 32 of our population growth were white. Just to give you a sense of how we're getting much more diverse. That was continuing a trend from the previous decade where I think we were, I think maybe somewhere between 10 and 20% white, but a dramatic increase in that trend. And so this is really important. And then, you know, I think we've been just trying to reach out to different groups and organizations in particular, and sometimes individuals in our community. And Brian can probably, or Emma, I don't think Emma's on here, but Emma's the one who probably tracks those groups and organizations with Brian. And Brian had a lot of communications with him last summer as part of our equity assessment report. But so I don't know if you're looking for specific organizations or anything, but we certainly, yeah, we've got a pretty good list. And Brian, I don't know if you remember how long that list is, but.
Yeah, I couldn't put a number on it, but you know, I'm grateful for the relationships that we have with different organizations and people that help build that network and make introductions so that you can foster new relationships and strengthen existing ones. So it's we're definitely on that path forward, and appreciate everyone's help in making those connections with us.
I was going to say hi, Laura, just to say,
Hi.
just to, the equity impact worksheet is one that professionally aware of. I think the RPC has done a lot of work with the organizations, and so we probably don't need to belabor this point on this pillar for today. But I do encourage specific partnerships and examples of ones that have worked particularly well would be valuable to maybe send along afterwards, or I can circle back. Yep. Laura, did you want to jump in?
Yep. I'm at a doctor's appointment waiting for my child to get out, so I have limited opportunity to speak, but I wanted to just add, you know, Burlington has taken a pretty significant effort to try to find these community members. As others have said, we have had really good success with kind of these local offset groups, being able to reach out to the community members, almost acting as a liaison. I also want to bring up one of our recent projects. We actually started speaking with high school students. You would have thought that they would have been represented through their guardians or whatnot, but these high school students, you know, new 18-year-olds are a very diverse portion of our community that I don't think I even realized. And their voices were so strong and so different than the people who would have been at their guardian age. So just wanted to add that for perspective.
Thanks, Laura. Adam, I see you're off mute. Are you interested in speaking?
Yeah. So I guess what I wanted to talk about was I guess the disability community in Vermont. That's, I think, kind of the biggest perspective I have. So I'm not really aware of like anything specific to Jericho, which is the town I'm from. But I think maybe the disability perspective is more under needs analysis. I'm also on the Vermont Statewide Independent Living Council, and we have a transportation committee as well, and it's a representative from VTrans, and he said one of the bigger issues right now is not having enough drivers. I guess they've kind of been relying on volunteer drivers in their programming, And then I also know that they have an elders and persons with disabilities transportation program. I think we've talked about summit they had earlier in June. But yeah, I think that's mainly what I wanted to say. Is that I think there's still difficulty trying to ensure there's enough volunteer drivers.
Thanks, Adam, for being here.
Mhm.
I think please don't hesitate once you get my contact information if there's any particular other insights that you can provide from those perspectives and the different councils. So
sure.
Yeah. I'm going to move along to a different pillar, and I think to stimulate some additional conversation. Is that all right? Once we identify communities or we believe we've found ways to engage with them, so we've already heard some examples of some of that particular engagement here, but I wanted to ask, and this maybe is embedded in the prioritization process as well. I think understanding how do we make decisions and how do we make decisions that are representative of our communities? How are we hearing from them? How are we bringing them to the table? Have there been efforts or examples where maybe the TAC is enhanced for certain actions, or at a local level, if there's a particular investment that we're looking at, do we invite those to the table and help us vet our project options? So I'm curious whether there's been any particular examples and any experiences that would be notable, or if there's been any innovations in this space that you wanted to kind of bring up.
Yeah, I've got a comment. It goes to one of the first slides you had, the overall structure of this project, and sort of the center section were all green boxes, and those are the people that actually make the decisions. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when I look at that, I look at mostly white, upper middle class people. And getting input from the various minorities or economically disadvantaged groups is great, but they don't have any direct say on exactly what decisions are made. In other words, who do you pay attention to? How do you focus this project? And yeah, I've been here over 20 years, but before that, I lived in the Deep South for too many decades. And that was a big problem there. It's, yes, this is all good, but who makes the decisions? And down there it was mostly rich white folks made the decisions. And it kind of sets a tone for those who aren't part of that group as to, what's going to happen. So it's just sort of a comment that you might want to think about.
Have there been any, I know at a particular project to project level, there's probably greater access to communities in a very localized area. But I think that's, to Bob's point, with everybody on the call, have we had any experiences bringing new voices into the project planning process? Yep.
I sit on a committee, an economic development committee for a municipality in Chittenden County. And I have to say, when they got a member of the BIPOC community this past year on the committee, it was enlightening to hear her comments, specifically about transportation. She commented on the fact that trains were being overlooked, and that her family connections, not only within the state, but outside of Vermont, were deeply inhibited by the fact that there wasn't good train transportation into Vermont. She said affordability of flying is beyond what my group can afford. And trains become more viable along with buses. And I have found her vantage point to be really enlightening. But the biggest problem is to get more people like her to these committee meetings and to participate, for example, in a TAC meeting. Can they give up 2 or 3 hours on a Tuesday morning to join us? Perhaps we need to look at how we not only invite them in, but how we make our scheduling accessible for them.
Thanks for those observations. Eleni.
So I just want to say that at the project level, regional or local levels, we do try to reach out to underserved populations and groups. We have done a lot of focus groups in Winooski, in Burlington, with the ID9 study, for example. We have brought together diverse people to talk about issues, challenges, and those have been really, as Sam said, enlightening. It was really good to hear their issues, which I have to say is pretty much, like issues that most of us share. But one thing that it became clear is that even though we saw many successes in those focus groups and those discussions at the very beginning of the project, when we're talking about issues and difficulties and what we want to just improve upon, well, 2 things. One thing Bob talked about is like the people that make the final decisions, and those people are not sitting at the table, and that's something that we need to overcome. And the second one that I feel is very important, which I think that we need to focus on, is education of how we go from receiving like input to analyzing that input and then including that input into the final decisions, plans, improvements, all that stuff. The education is lacking. So when we went back to these groups at the end of the projects, they just couldn't understand the trajectory of the project. So I feel education and bringing like that to the people is as important as everything else that we're talking about. So I'm just going to leave it to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleni. That's helpful. Sandy.
Hi there. I guess, going off from the education piece that Eleni just mentioned, is I think about employers from the employer side, their experience with hiring employees and because of transportation challenges. And recently had an employer in Essex that, had hired someone and had to, and they had to leave the job because it was taking them 2 hours to get to work. And I was just thinking about, even from Katma's perspective or others, like providing follow-up to that individual versus, that person just leaving the job because they had transportation challenges, like following up with them, to say, what was the challenge? And obviously there's only so many maybe services or resources that could be a solution to them. But I think following up with those different, community members versus sort of like leaving them, they've gone home and now how are they going to, get to work? So I appreciate, this conversation. It makes me think, of an opportunity to follow up with some of those people. And, there's only so many resources, available to an employer, maybe their time to actually follow up with that individual, so a resource for those people, that's provides them education and resources to retain their job or find another job that's better located for them.
I'm going to move us along to another pillar here, and the conversation is all connected, so we're not going to lose anything. And we can discuss needs, and priorities are always a challenging one. I've already discussed how we make decisions and the priorities of those decisions, but now it's once we identify, or how do we identify the needs in our communities? And that list we know already is in excess of our funding capacity. It's in excess of our ability to deliver a lot of projects. And these projects sometimes are legacy things. However, the challenge is becoming more apparent that if we bring new voices to the table, we're going to hear problems that we may not have been aware of in the past. And so our needs list is probably going to become more diverse and maybe grow. Have there been efforts to start to identify new investments that would be particularly focused around addressing current inequities? And I'm just thinking about the equity report that you did, as well as the work that the RPC has been so innovative on. Have there been any projects that have been identified that have come from those conversations?
Just can I say, maybe projects, I don't know of any projects, but definitely it influenced the solutions, right?
Perfect.
So those conversations influence the end result, but I'm not aware of a specific, I'm thinking of a transportation project right now that just came out of those conversations, but maybe I'm just not remembering everything correctly. Brian, do you remember?
Well, I think, yeah, let's use a broader sense of when I say project, but
Okay.
I think
Okay.
it would be really helpful, Eleni, and actually the Institute of Transportation Engineers had a call out about a month ago to say, give us examples of particular investments, efforts, examples of where focused conversations have led to changes in the outcomes.
Okay.
Brian's thinking.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of hit a couple of the points. We're currently updating the regional active transportation plan, which is a long-range walk-bike plan, and we took a different tack in the public engagement piece, and it was sort of like the I-89 study. We tried to identify different communities and groups of people that typically aren't at the table and aren't the decision makers, and having conversations with those folks about, what do you like or dislike about walking and biking? What's the first thing you would change? And so while a consultant in the back end has been doing some different data analysis, using census data, different map layers, and so on and so forth, then we can take the comments of these people's experiences and really understand where those changes can be made in the system or would have the most benefit to different populations beyond sort of the legacy projects, which we might not be, which we are aware of. I know we're going to start a walk-bike plan in Winooski this coming fiscal year, which will draw on the 2017 transportation plan that Eleni and the team did, which really was a big first step for the RPC, I believe, in engaging those diverse populations. So this is another opportunity for us to go to the community events, different gathering places, and just talk directly with people, including the schools. So it's great to hear Laura's comment about engaging high school voices. Also, one more point, I'm thinking of the Old North End mobility study, which Old Spokes Home did. I think maybe we shared that information with the TAC previously. That was sort of in-person survey based that Old Spokes Home did. And then the Old North End walk bike stormwater study, that we did that looks sort of in the North Ave, North Street, Battery Park, Sustainability Academy area. That was another a first time for us to translate different materials, use QR codes that linked to translated materials online. I don't think we did sort of that specific personal outreach during that. Actually, I did go to different businesses on that end, on the west side of the Old North End, to hand out flyers, which were translated in different languages and so on. So there are some specific pieces of projects, but I'm not thinking of a project specifically that came out of those conversations. But probably when we hang up on this call, I'll think of something.
So one more project that comes to mind, and it started with conversations when we started the Winooski Transportation Plan some years ago, was just the need for some BIPOC community in Winooski to basically for younger kids to have a bus transportation during the winter months. Because there was a lot of young children that were missing school during the winter months. So we brought the Winooski city officials as well as the school, and we had great conversations with some organizations. And I think it ended up having like they basically funded a bus. I'm not quite sure if that bus is still there, but you know, that is a direct kind of like outcome of having these conversations with the people that they actually experience the issue, and we find a solution. And we can just send you all that information, John, afterwards.
Yeah, that's great. I think I'm going to turn it to Jonathan here in a second. And Eleni, I think that particular topic was elevated in the equity audit that City of Winooski just recently completed, maybe 2 months ago, is that was identified in that as a particular challenge. So I think that bus may not be present, or people didn't know about it, which is often a challenge too.
That's another thing. That is just education too.
All right. Jonathan, do you want to chat?
Yeah, Brian's mention of of Old Spokes's mobility audit reminded me that in the conversations that we had with some of the folks when that audit was published, one of the things that I learned, this is an example of just a specific policy change, was that someone who was getting around in a wheelchair was having trouble navigating some of the curb extensions that have been installed in Burlington. And it was a comment that I was like, you know, at first I was like, what does this even mean, right? Like there's a 5-foot clear through the curb extensions, and you know, after having a little more conversation with that person, we realized that they were having to use their wheelchair in the street because the sidewalk was in such bad condition. And so they were having to either try and get through the curb extension if it was a pilot version, or go around it farther onto the travel lane. So, you know, on our end, it's something that I look for now if we're going to recommend a curb extension somewhere, to make sure that the sidewalk is in good shape beforehand. If we're doing a pop-up project, to not implement a temporary curb extension if the sidewalk's in bad shape. I don't know if it's something that, you know, other towns are looking at as a policy to sort of sidewalk first before curb extension. But I think that audit is a great example of how you can, you know, reach out to a community in, you know, an engaging way, going door to door, holding events, and then sort of record some of that in an audit and bring it to specific policies.
And,
great. I'm encouraged to hear all these great examples. Brian, what'd you think about?
I'll just add to that, you know, at the end of that, I mean, there's all sort of these data points, but at the end of it, I think one of the main takeaways was there are a lot of people out there that don't know that projects are happening. They don't know how to be involved. They don't understand the transportation planning process, and they're not the ones making the decisions. So a part of that is coming back to the people that we talk to about how their input informed the outcome of the project.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I think I've heard several times over the awareness of the planning process, and if anybody has a great flow chart already, let me have it. And then if not, I think it's going to be an outcome in this project for sure. All right. So moving on, I'm going to spend our time, I think, the last two pillars here, and then we're going to talk more generically about the framework itself. If I read your agenda right, I don't think you're prioritizing, but you're introducing some of the upcoming projects for either MTP consideration, is that right? Or no? But
So we are starting the update of the MTP, John.
yeah.
And those are the projects that they were in the old MTP. Some of them were done, they were removed. That was a different kind of spreadsheet. And then that's kind of where that next item on the agenda is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Christine, I'll let you maybe be the first one to answer the question, but how are we starting to embed equity into the prioritization process within the RPC? And we can talk about the RPC first, but also I do want to be sensitive. We have a number of communities here as well, and whether there's particular experiences that they've had at the local level would be really valuable. So Christine, you want to tell us about the regional
Well,
perspective?
thank you, John, for giving me a really easy question to answer. I appreciate that. I think the answer is we're working on it. It's a work in progress. I think that, as Eleni said before, I think that when we talk about very specific projects, because people react to something, you're showing them something, and it's a little bit easier to react to that than just a more broad, what do you need in the transportation system? I wouldn't say that we're there yet in any way, but I think our focus is a little bit more broad on trying to engage as many people as possible. I think in some of the communities, Burlington, Winooski, I think one thing is that we definitely talk about who the populations are that we need to reach to get comments. Burlington, Winooski, we've done a little bit better at making a more broad communication with people, but yeah, it's still a work in progress.
Clearly from the statewide effort, the region has its own priorities, but being an MPO, you have your own methods and ways of doing these things. So if it's a work in progress, if there's something that you want to add, Charlie, I think is going to jump in and add a little bit more flavor to the regional perspective. And then I would love to hear if there's anything from a town perspective as to how any of the investments or projects that might be elevated to the region for funding, how equity is being considered. So Charlie, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, we did take a little stab at this. Christine was like 15 months ago and provided some of that input to VTrans as part of the VPSP2 process. But also just to note that the prioritization system in Vermont, the VPSP2, has been a partnership between the RPCs and VTrans. And so we are really not doing any extraneous prioritization outside of that process. It's all part of the VPSP2 process, essentially. Is that fair, Christine? I don't want to.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. So just for context, there isn't a separate process really. It is the VTrans process that we're all part of.
Right.
And equity is not an explicit factor in that process, as you know now. But I would make a pitch that we figure out how to add that in there.
Thanks, Charlie. So I think the opportunities I've heard from others is that we do have opportunities to improve on how equity is explicitly accounted for in the prioritization process. Before I move on to how we can monitor changes over time, are there anything else from maybe any of the communities on local priorities and maybe examples of how equity has been considered? Deidre?
Yeah, I'm from Charlotte, and I can give you a quick example. I'm hopefully this is answering your question. We I don't know that I'm the best person to speak on this, but I think it's good to add this example into your research and your awareness. In Charlotte, we're working on a crosstown trail, a bike ped trail, with the idea that it's for recreation, but also hoping to promote it, to frame it in the context of alternative transportation as well. And the routing of that at one point went right alongside a Black-owned farm in town, the Clemens Farm, which is not only Black-owned, but also has started, is in the process of expanding, but is at this point a educational and cultural farm. So they're hosting more events. I don't know if I'm explaining it the way they would like it to be explained, but my point is that it's expanding to be a public place, and they did not want the town trail going along the edge of their property. And what I recall hearing is that they spoke up about that at several meetings, and then spoke up another time because they felt like their concerns were not being heard. And this relates back to what we're saying in terms of who do you go to for information, and then who are the decision makers? It's possible that the decision makers were not coming from a place where they could fully understand the concerns that were being raised by the Clemens family, just because their life experience and their work and professional experiences are so different. I don't know the current status of that project, so I don't know if it's been resolved or not, but that was certainly, I think, an example of what we're talking about and how that plays out in a small town.
Thank you, Deidre. That was a good reminder of that particular challenge. And yeah, I don't know the status of it. So Charlie, go for it one more time.
Sorry. Yeah. I'll just own the troublemaker hat in this topic. I would be really interested to know if there's been any research done nationally about particularly transportation investments in, whether it's, I'll just say low income neighborhoods, just to start from that aspect of equity. Have, those kinds of investments had an impact on wealth creation in that neighborhood? Or is it just benefiting, out of neighborhood landlords? Is kind of I guess not a concern, but it's something I'd like to know a little bit more about, like what kinds of investments actually do make a difference in terms of equitable outcomes. I just haven't seen that yet. And maybe there are parts of the country that are much further ahead on this issue than we are. Our equity, worksheet that we developed, years ago, we stole from King County, Washington, which is Seattle area. Maybe they've done some more work on this since then, but they seem to be leading this work, 10 years ago. I don't know where it all is at this point in time. So hopefully we get a little bit more detail on this, and should we be looking at our county in terms of, income levels, in terms of the geographies and where we're making investments. And I don't know if Burlington has been doing some more thinking. I'm seeing Laura pop up here. So I'll turn it over to her.
Thanks, Charlie.
Could turn off your video, Laura. We were not hearing you.
How's that?
Go for it.
It may be worthwhile to look at the improvements that happened around North Street. That's one of a lower income, especially back when the work was done, area of town. And it certainly changed the way that corridor and that community is. I did want to speak, and if my connection's not great, Jonathan can speak to our sidewalk inventory that we've done and are updating, but that does put some emphasis on equity improvements and consideration of neurodiverse populations within our community to improve our sidewalk transportation in those areas ahead of other areas in our community.
Yeah, I've mentioned your sidewalk priorities to a different community there, Laura. So that's, I think, one that we can flag. So I like the North Ave or North Street example, local example. And so, Charlie, I've heard the request loud and clear for the project at large. Yep. So let's spend just maybe 2 or 3 more minutes here, because it goes to that point, is that what do we view as success and how are we going to measure success over time? So Charlie's setting up the lob ball there, but basically how can we look, and have we looked internally in Chittenden County, if we're going to evaluate what is a successful outcome for achieving equitable means? Do we have already performance measures in mind? And maybe Christine answers the question is that it's a work in progress, but we need to ask the question, have there been any particular metrics that have been considered at the regional level or even at a town level?
I'll start again, but we did identify indicators. So these are more countywide outcome measures as part of our ECOS indicators. So they're online. You can grab them. We probably have a couple of them in the annual report that just came out, but there's more in the whole indicator. And most of them were around the fundamental question of wealth, right? Like income, home ownership. Those are the 2 off the top of my head. I think education and health outcomes are the other ones, but it gets challenging, I think, doing transportation work. Like, how do you connect, building that sidewalk in a low income neighborhood to, did that help increase income in that neighborhood? That's a leap. But I think if there's something in the middle about, where that we're measuring kind of what we're doing, like where are we making investments? How are we making those investments? Who did we talk to before making those investments? That's a little bit more process-oriented indicator, maybe, that might tell us if we're heading in the right direction.
Right. Adele.
Sorry, the buttons don't always respond. I guess I would ask the community that you're trying to serve what would be indicators of success. And one of the things I think that could come up are the unintended consequences. And what I mean by that is, as you add new, what seems to be a great thing, like a sidewalk or a bus stop or anything, do we understand how it may disrupt the community? I mean, if you think about the traditional trains or highways that have just decimated communities because the land was so much cheaper. And then to that point, besides the public education, and I would check in with the Office of Disability on the federal level, because the things we don't understand, from things just like color blindness. But what I'm trying to say is that land value, once you make a place better, I wonder what the fear is of, will they be priced out of being able to stay there? So I think some of these indicators of success would be great to find out what the community we're trying to work with would consider indicators of success, because I wouldn't be surprised if people, besides thinking it was hopeless to have a voice, would be, I don't want this place to get better because I won't be able to stay here. And so maybe the indicators of success are as simple as the public education or a plan in place. I know the Lincoln Land Institute's done a lot of with land value capture about, how do we just make it safe for people to know it can be nicer and they won't have to leave in a couple of years. So I think that might be one of those unrealized, you asked a couple at a different point, like these unrealized questions that come up or problems to solve, or I would just take it much more simply. If you go to the laundromat and you have a conversation, you go to the local something, I think you have to be super careful about, we want to make this nicer for you, because I think that's going to scare the heck out of people, especially anyone who's trying to stay under the radar and doesn't want it be seen for a lot of reasons. So.
Thanks, Adele. I believe the term is environmental gentrification when improving the infrastructure, and then as a result, some changes. So that's excellent point though. And I think that's an effort I think we need to bring to the direct conversation. I think frankly, we were not asking the question as to how we're going to measure success. I think we've been asking about how to be involved, how do you bring your voice to the table? But I think we need to ask more explicitly about that measure of success and what are the concerns about that success. So thank you for elevating that. All right, I realize that we're basically at time here, and I wanted to just show the screen here. If there's any real big answer that anybody wants to provide to any of these questions, please do. But you have the PDF, or you will shortly, and you'll have the contact information for myself as well as Dave and other members of the team. But we tabled a definition of transportation equity. If there's a working definition or any definition that any community member or any RPC member has that you'd like to send us, please do. We're interested in how the framework can be most useful for how we do our work, and always curious as to how it can be most useful to you. So please send that along. I think some of the tools, Charlie and Eleni and even Brian, we're probably going to send along some of the examples and some of the other things. I think the RPC is really well ahead in terms of embedding a lot of these thinking into the planning process. And I would love to share any of the tools that you think are really valuable, or maybe say, hey, look, this was good. We'd love to iterate and improve upon it. But we do need to provide, I think, some examples for other parts around the state as to how they can learn from these. So if you have any tools, methods, and measures, always be interested to hear your thoughts. So with that, I'll open the floor just for 2 minutes, and then we'll wrap it up. So I see Barbara keeping time, and so thank you, everybody. Jonathan, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, just kind of a high-level question. I think the legislation talks about communities that are underserved by the transportation system. Do we have a working definition for that, or is that just sort of a guiding phrase for this whole thing?
Yeah, I think we do not have, I don't have a definition that I can tell you today. I would be inappropriate to make one up on the spot, but we can provide, I think we intend to put a glossary of kind of an official, or at least a working definition of some key terms such as that. Okay. Dave, you want to say anything else at the end?
I just want to thank everybody for their time and for really sharing with us your wisdom, in particular some of the municipal contributions. I think it's heartening. Unsurprisingly, y'all are a little ahead of some other areas of the state, and I think as usual, I think we are glad to look at the Chittenden County region and hopefully take some examples and hold some of your work up as sort of a guide for others around the state. And I guess I just want to thank everybody for their time this morning.
Yeah, I'll echo that. So thank you all. We heard some really good information today, some different perspectives that will be really valuable for the study. I like some of the specific examples that we have. As Dave said, luckily you've been thinking about these things for a few years, so we're able to benefit from your leadership and your work. So thank you all again for your time this morning, and we'll all stop sharing.
Thank you, Dave and John. Great. If people, the link is already up on the website for the presentation, which also has all the contact information. So if people have other ideas or information to share, please check out the links at the end of the presentation. This brings us to the 2023 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. And I am guessing Christine is going to be sharing with us.
Yes, I'm going to start, and then Lainey will handle the second part of this. So, yep, 2023 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. I think everybody's aware that this is underway right now. One part of the MTP is a project list. So we're required as part of the MTP to do a financial plan where we will estimate the amount of money that we expect to have over the next 20 years. And then we can also develop a list of projects that we want to move forward with the money that we expect to be available. So this is just the tee off. I'm currently at my parents' house at a golf club, so I'll use golf analogies. We're gonna tee off the conversation of the project list. And I'm not gonna bring up a screen, but you were in your packet, there were 3 separate tables, just to confuse you all, but I just wanna pause a minute for table 1 and just say we should all pat ourselves on the back of all the great work that we've done since 2018. So table 1 is the list of things that were on the MTP project list in the last plan that have been completed. On that list, there were 4 projects, long history projects in our area, the US 7 reconstruction in Charlotte, the 2A US 7 intersections in Colchester. We did 116 CVU Road. That was a long process project, and we built Market Street, which was an awesome accomplishment. There were 19 bike ped projects, which were mainly grants, transportation enhancement grants and bike ped grants. So that's all the work that the towns have done. So you guys did an awesome job on that. Burlington, Colchester, Essex, Heinsberg, Jericho, Milton, Shelburne, South Burlington, Underhill all had bike ped projects. So that was great. Intersection projects, there were several different intersection projects, US 7 Ferry Road, Blakely Road, Laker Lane, Vermont 15, Browns Trace and Jericho, and then signal upgrades in Essex, South Burlington, Shelburne, and we also completed 4 of the Circle Alternative projects. So that was the work that was done over the last 4 years, and we'll get a complete table of that and a breakdown of funding, which might be interesting. Table 2 is the remaining projects that were on the MTP project list, and this list is organized by municipality, and it's being provided here at this time just for your initial looking through it. Does it make sense? Are there things that should be removed? So those are the 2 questions. Are there things that are on this list that as a town we say we don't want these projects anymore? And then the next step is really to figure out if there's anything that's missing. And to help us talk about if there's anything that's missing, table 3 was just the list of projects that have been done, planning studies that have been done by CCRPC since 2018. Just to trigger your memories of what has been done and if there's anything that should be added to the list. So I believe next month, I'm looking at Eleni, I believe next month we're going to bring you a more polished list, the proposed new list. And so this is just a discussion item at this point. So does anybody have any comments off the top of your head? And we can also, you can continue to email us if you have thoughts between now and the next meeting and after the next meeting.
Yeah, so just to follow up, as Christine said, just reach out to us if you have any comments on this, the project list, the 3 different kind of tables that Christine talked about. During the next couple of TAC meetings in September and October, we'll have a little bit more, just a comprehensive presentation on the 2023 draft MTP for your comment. But right now we're presenting some of the elements that we're working on. So I would just pause here to see if there's any question on the projects that Christine talked about before I move on to the vision and goals and objectives, the draft vision, goals and objectives.
You have to wait 8 seconds.
Okay. Is it like one hippopotamus? Is it, how do we do it? I still remember my daughter when she was 5. Okay, I think I'm just gonna move on. I think I'm just gonna try and share my screen, but I might not be able to do it. So let's see. Okay, share screen. Do you see the draft?
Yes.
Wonderful. Wow, it worked. So transportation staff worked on this, these statements of the draft transportation vision goals and some of the objectives for, for our 2023 MTP. I am not going to go through it in detail. The vision is kind of like at a high level of what we want to see in our system. Our system, we want to be safe, efficient, resilient, equitable, support choices, in support really of our livable communities, as well as the economy of the region. So if you have any suggestions on that vision statement, please just reach out to us. Happy to take any edits, any additions or deletions. And on the goals and objectives, again, these are the major goals that we think it should be in the plan. But if you have any other thoughts about anything that is missing or anything that we need to just kind of just describe differently, please let us know. This is, again, very draft. The very first, just look and thoughts that we had on this. So the categories that we wanted to focus on was safety, the livable and healthy communities, mobility and efficiency of the system, and the multimodal system that we want to have. And here is equity. And equity, I think, needs to be expanded a little bit. Right now, we're talking about, just the transportation investments, and we are referencing to the Title VI and the environmental justice, which is like federal, requirements for us, which we look at in every project, and the engagement. But is there something else that we want to add under equity? And that's something that we're going to be. This morning's discussion was very something that's going to give us food for thought on that. We're talking about the environment resiliency, and these were including the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the ability of the transportation network to withstand weather events, which is the resilience part of the kind of the goal. We're talking about the economy. Where do we want to focus on this? Is that the right ones, the right, just the right objectives under that goal of the, we need to improve the economy of the region. And then, of course, the major thing that we need to preserve what we have. So we need to maintain the system we have. And I don't know if you remember, but in the 2018 MTP, basically 70% of our funding, future funding to 2050, goes to maintain our system. And we only have 30% of that. And I don't remember now, it was like 420 million or something, to basically improve our system with, whatever improvements we want to do. So with that, I am not going to go through it. If you have any really thoughts right now that you want to share, please do. Otherwise, happy to get any emails that you have. So Adele, I see that you raised your hand. Go
Just
ahead.
real quickly with the economy, I would just add, besides economic vitality, economic equity, because that gets into people not being priced out of a place that got nicer to live. And then the only other thing was, when you talk about equity, I would just reference in there the transportation equity framework. That it should be mentioned in the vision statement so that at least they're working together.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you. Those are great thoughts.
Thank you.
And Anybody else that wants to chime in right now? You don't have to. You can just reach out at any time. But if you have something right now, please go ahead. And I don't see you, so please just jump in. All right, so I don't hear anything, so I will just stop sharing. And again, please look through it. If you have comments, send them over, and then you're going to see a revised statements next time we present in September.
Great, thank you, Eleni. These are the last 2 pages of your meeting packet. So if you can take a more thorough look at them, if you haven't already, that would be great.
Eleni, when would you like comments by?
So comments by, what do we have at beginning of August, end of August? Before we send the packet to the TAC for the September TAC, whatever that date is, Brian, I'm not quite sure what that is.
I don't know, at the very end of the month.
End of the month.
They're August 30th, August 29th.
August 29th, even, very specific date.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is the status of projects and committee reports, which are included in your packet. Are there any specific things people want to raise today? If not, please contact the specific staff people for that. Do we have a board meeting report?
I included a blurb about what the board discussed, presented, or made decisions on as part of your packet.
Okay. And for members items, I see that you do have a list there. Brian, do you want to run through that?
Sure, thanks for that. We'll lead off with the Safe Streets and Roads for All items. This is one of the federal grant programs that are out there. We fielded some questions and requests from some different municipalities, so we thought it would be helpful to include this on there. We don't plan on submitting a regional application for this round. We're happy to support and assist any local applications for those who are interested in pursuing those funds this year. It's a 5-year program. So we will consider some sort of regional application next year. It does require a match, and based on the minimum funding requirements for the grant, it would require a pretty significant match, which would come from municipal dues. And so we want to be very mindful of how we're using those funds on our end. So we'll have that discussion with you all again in the coming months or early next year. VTrans released their Mobility and Transportation Innovation Grant Program. It's another funding source for projects that you may want to consider. Park and Ride Grant Program is also out there. I wanted to note the VLCT Municipal Equity Toolkit. It's pretty user-friendly. I included the link there, just a part of our learning surrounding equity, some other tools. There's some FAQs in there. It's been pretty useful for us the past couple of weeks, so I encourage you to look at that. And then finally, I wanted to provide an update on the Regional Bike Share Program. We received notice early in July that our vendor Bolt Mobility was ceasing operations. So the fleet, while you'll still see bikes on the ground, the system is inoperable at this point. I'm working closely with Sandy and others to determine what the next steps are. But we wanted to just give you a heads up that that's sort of the unfortunate system status as of now. And we'll know more in the coming weeks. So probably I can provide another update in September with sort of our thinking around that.
Barbara, you're muted.
Okay, sorry about that. There's also a list of potential future items at the at the end of the agenda. If people have any additions, please send those to Brian. And if there are no additional comments from members or staff, I see Sandy. Yes.
Yeah. Let's see, I am unmuted. Yes. So yeah, just wanted to mention CATMA is celebrating our 30th year as an organization this year, and we are planning and have scheduled an inaugural transportation summit on October 18th at the UVM Davis Center. It's a one-day in-person program, and just think it's an exciting time or interesting time to look at, you know, what transportation is in and around Chittenden County and in the state, and lots of projects happening. So we'll be sending out invites and promoting that event soon, particularly to the tech and other businesses and developers and transportation partners. So yeah, hope you'll all join us.
Excellent. Great. Any other comments or information people have to share? If not, I don't see anyone. Next meeting is September 6th, so we'll see you all then. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. And is there a second?
I'll second that.
Excellent. All those in favor, wave or say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Excellent. We'll see you all on September 6th. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. Have a great day.